Hello, everyone. This session is about how to adjudicate Amit Golders. If you want to know how to adjudicate other people, there's other sessions. For people who did this session last year, this is going to be identical, so you will get no extra value. I'm sorry. That's right. Goodbye, Jackie. Beavis, did you do this session last year? That's fine. There will be no extra value, just so you know. That's fine. No. Pardon? Oh, awkward. Okay, I don't mind. I'm just saying don't be here if you want to learn new things if you were here last year. On like the list of things that aren't my problem, right? Like low. Okay. So for those who don't know me, and I think I know everyone in the room, but for those who don't know me, I'm Amit Golder. I will be talking to you today about how to adjudicate. If at any point I say something that doesn't make sense or you'd like an example of or requires further clarification, please put your hand up and let me know or shoot me in the face with something. Because this works much, much better if people let me know if I don't make sense, because with old age comes dementia. Okay. Your job as an adjudicator is to do three main things. Those are, number one, to decide who won the debate and why that team won the debate. Secondly, to convey that to the teams and to do so clearly. And thirdly, to provide constructive feedback to the teams and the speakers. Those are, so those are the main tasks. Pardon? Right, which is a different matter. So the question is, who are you when you're an adjudicator? Obviously, you're yourself, and I don't want to subsume that in anything else, but you're the average reasonable debater. That's not the same as the average reasonable person, which is obvious, right? No, what that means is the average reasonable debater we take to be someone who has a decent knowledge of current affairs and of the world at large, but not specialist knowledge in anything in particular. The average reasonable debater is also possesses fairly sound logic skills. Those are the things that we assume that you as an adjudicator should have, and those are the only things really that you should be bringing to the table. The reason I point that out is because you don't have specialist knowledge. Topics will come up where you know more about them than the debaters, but you cannot use that knowledge to the detriment of the debaters in making a decision or in giving scores or things like that. After the debate, when you're giving constructive feedback, that is when you can use that specialist knowledge. But importantly, as an adjudicator, you do not have specialist knowledge. Like I said, you have a good sense of logic. The upshot of all those things is that you may not enter the debate. And entering the debate is when an adjudicator rebuts arguments when no one else in the debate rebuts them, or assesses things as being not just illogical, but factually incorrect and punishes teams for that, or assumes that certain arguments should be made in certain debates, and if they're not, punishes teams for that. Now that has a little bit of scope within that, right? Like, if you're doing a debate about banning smoking and no teams talk about the harms of cigarettes at all, you are well within your rights as the average reasonable debater to say, I think this debate should have had some discussion of the harms of cigarettes. But you don't need to go further and say they should have talked about all the different types of cancers and how they have different risk rates based on whether you smoke or not. I have no idea. But yeah, so again, average reasonable amounts of knowledge can be required of the debaters, but don't enter the debate. Don't rebut things, don't expect things that are unreasonable. Come on. I want to stress this. There is no such thing as an automatic win or loss in debating. There is nothing that a team can do that will mean they have automatically won or automatically lost the debate. You might feel like there are sometimes. Sometimes people will do or say stupid things, or worse, sometimes debaters will do or say offensive things. Those are matters outside the scope of the debate, and as an adjudicator, it's not your job to say, because that team was racist, they lose. As luck would have it, racism tends to be illogical quite a lot of the time and, dumb. And so what that means is that often the team that is racist will be the dumb team, the team that loses. But it's not always the case. If there's matters of equity violation, if there's matters of code of conduct violation, or if the people just doing silly things in debates, that doesn't mean they automatically lose yet. You have to judge each debate on its merits. You have to judge each debate based on what happens in it. Yeah, looks like you. Yeah. Yeah. You brought that on yourself. So who wins the debate? Is it the most persuasive team? Is it the highest scoring team? Or is it the team that wins on matter, i.e. the issues? The answer is, of course, all three. We want the highest scoring team to be the most persuasive team and to generally be the team that also wins the matter elements of the debate. And by and large, that's what happens in university debating. Sometimes there'll be a discrepancy, right, between who wins on matter and who's the most persuasive, and that discrepancy can be discussed using manner. So I'm going to assume for this session that everyone knows what matter, manner, and method are. Does anyone not? Cool. So that's who wins the debate. And the reason that I'm pointing that out, I see like everyone in this room would know that. The reason I'm pointing that out is because sometimes in talking about strategy, technique, matter, and all the rules that debating has, we lose sight of the fact that it's the most persuasive team that wins the debate. Not the team that follows the rules the best, not the team that sounds like they're debating the best, but the team that is in fact the most persuasive. There's a number of elements of that, and we're going to go through them now, but it's important to not lose sight of the fact that that's the goal. Next. All right, so let's talk about matter. What is matter? Oh, back. Matter is the content of the debate. It is what is said substantively in arguments. It is also what is said in rebuttal. It's the stuff that comes out of people's mouths, the contents of their speeches. There are two criteria for assessing matter. The first is logic. Asking of an argument or a piece of rebuttal, why? And the way you assess logic is to ask, does one thing follow from another? Do the premises support the conclusions? And can those things be reasonably inferred, or is more explanation required? Any questions on logic? Good. That's the first criteria. Is the argument logical? Second criteria, is the argument relevant? Do the premises support the conclusions? And more importantly, does the conclusion support the speaker's side of the topic? You can make the most logically infallible point, but if it doesn't support your side of the topic, it doesn't matter. Right. Or more to the point, it's not that it'll support the other side, just that it will be irrelevant. It'll be a point that actually has no bearing on the debate. Two criteria for judging matter: logic and relevance. So if you see an argument, if you see a piece of rebuttal, just ask yourself, is it logical? Does it make sense? Has it been explained? And is it relevant? And how relevant is it? Is it very centrally relevant, or is it only peripherally relevant? Those are the two criteria. Very, very rarely will you hear adjudicators split those up like that and talk about them separately when assessing an argument. It happens holistically usually. It tends to be that if something is not relevant, it's not logical either, and vice versa. But it's important to remember those are the two criteria. Any questions on matter? We'll get to some like issues of adjudication that crop up later, but I just want to go through these basics now. Yeah. Well, let's think about two situations. One in which what they're saying is something that an average reasonable person would know. So one team is saying that the Earth has gravity and that based on that they're going to drop bombs from the sky. And the other team is saying, well, we're not going to assume that, so we need a better system. An average reasonable person, I'm so glad this is being recorded. An average reasonable person would side with the gravity team. If, by contrast, it's not necessarily even characterization of status quo, but like specific knowledge, then as an adjudicator, you can't enter the debate. You just have to see which team has offered the more plausible explanation of why their characterization is correct, and probably more likely, which team has done a better job of engaging with the debate despite that. So regardless of whether their characterization of status quo is correct, which team has still been able to engage with the issues of the debate better. So, any other questions on matter? All right. Oh, so one last thing about matter actually is that examples are really good, analogies are really good, but they're not necessary. An argument is complete without an example, a fact, a statistic, an analogy. It is improved by those things, however. It is made more real, more plausible, more concrete, but it is not a requirement of every argument that it has an example. That's why the two tests for matter were logic and relevance, not logic, relevance, and truth. It's a persuasion game. There are two sides to things. So, there are two parts to manner as well, vocal and non-vocal. Elements in vocal manner include things like volume, pace, tone, clarity, word choice, so being precise and appropriate, and an appropriate use of humour as a persuasive device, and conversely, not an inappropriate use of humour. And that, again, depends on like the tone of the debate as to whether humour is going to be appropriate. These things should be considered when you adjudicate, and they should be considered when you give debaters scores, and they should be considered when you give feedback to debaters. A lot of the time, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, we just focus on matter. And that's because, to be fair, a lot of the time at the higher levels of debating, manner is equal. Almost everyone is equally persuasive. But the best speakers don't just have good content, they also have excellent manner. There's a reason that Victor was the best speaker in the world. And it wasn't just because he knew the most, it was also because he said stuff the bestest. Adjudicators, and the best adjudicators, recognize high quality manner, and so should you. Not that you're not the bestest adjudicators. Oh. Okay, so I would encourage you to pay attention to these things and point them out to speakers. I'll talk about how we can incorporate a discussion of manner into a decision later, but it's important to point that out. So that's the vocal stuff, and there's also non-vocal stuff, like gesture, eye contact, stance, and use of body. This is, for example, where I'm the weakest. You may notice I've had my hands in my pockets, I walk backwards and forwards. I've been told that I play with my underwear a lot, like pull it out, when I debate. These are things that I did not know. These are evidently things that are holding me back. And so my aim should be to stand, shoulder width apart, to have full control over my gestures. The general rule, especially with non-vocal manner, the general rule is if something distracts from the speech, it's poor manner. So if a joke is not about an argument but is just for that joke's sake, then it's probably not that persuasive. If a gesture is distracting you from what someone is saying to their weird gesture, that is a poor bit of manner. By contrast, if something supports and enhances what people are saying, if word choice is particularly sophisticated and precise, if humour is used to not only be funny and engaging, but also to rebut something effectively, for example, then it in fact adds to what people are saying and therefore is good manner. I like to think that particularly in 3-on-3 style, we don't judge manner as a separate criteria, but we judge how it's used to support matter. Whether the opposite is true in British parliamentary is a discussion for semester 2. Here's a tough issue when we're adjudicating. Debating, as we do it, is an English language competition, which means we expect everyone to speak English, and we assume the same level of English competency. But what do we do when we have people for whom English is not their first language? What do we do when we have people who have accents that are different from our own? The rule that I apply is, if I can understand what someone is saying, that is enough. If they say things particularly well, then they have good manner. It is only when I actually can't understand what someone is saying that I'll make reference to language or accent in my adjudication. And that's fairly rare. And as an adjudicator, it is my job to listen as carefully and as hard as I can to dig through what people are saying to hear what they're saying. Someone with a thick accent is just as difficult to understand as someone who speaks a million miles an hour. We also have to understand that people only have limited capacity to improve those things, and so give our feedback accordingly. It's much more acceptable to say, please speak more slowly, than it is to say, can you please sound Western? I mean, I managed to fix my accent, but Yeah, I don't get what I'm saying either. All right. So my point here is do what you can to understand. Only comment on this if it actually impairs your ability to understand the words the speaker is saying. And those things still apply to people from ESL backgrounds or to people who have accents that are different from your own. And so those things can still be pointed to improve, to have good manner. Yep? I wouldn't necessarily mark it down. I would just say that, like, if you're understanding what they're saying, then they're still participants in the debate. But if they could have said it better, you can say that, right? If there's more precise language available to them, if there's more descriptive or useful language available to them, you can comment on that. I wouldn't necessarily mark someone down for the absence of those things, but I wouldn't mark them up, if that makes sense. Yeah, not having good manner isn't the same as having bad manner. So you can still have an average manner. And that's quite a broad spectrum. Any other questions on manner? Excellent. Method. Method is structure, priority/timing, and responsiveness. Structure, you all know what that is. It's remarkably easy to get right, which means when people get it wrong, I'm not afraid to punish them for it. Same thing with timing. Timing is just about being disciplined and having control. The second speaker who rebuts for 7 minutes deserves to be penalised for that. And I say that as a second speaker who routinely rebutted for 7 minutes and was routinely punished for it. Responsiveness is a less considered issue of method, but it is one nonetheless. If people choose the wrong issues to spend a lot of time on or miss large issues that they should be addressing in rebuttal or in substantive, that is an issue of responsiveness, and so should be marked down not just as an issue of matter, but also as an issue of method. Prioritization as well, within a second speaker or first negative's rebuttal, which things do they prioritize with time and with positioning in their speech? Doing that well is not just having good content of your rebuttal, but choosing what you rebut really well. The best third speeches I've ever seen are ones where there's just no fat. They don't waste time on peripheral issues that are not important to the debate. That's not to say they don't rebut small things, because they do. But it's about making really good choices of what you spend time on, of what you prioritize, and where in your speech. And that's how, by the way, best speakers at Australs and Easters and things like that get those 79s and 80s. Because it's not just high scores in matter, it's not just high scores in manner, but it's high scores in method. And those don't just come from having a clear structure, right? You get a theoretical 17 in method for prioritizing and timing things correctly. And the converse is also true. You get the lower scores by wasting time, by misdirecting, by missing things, and by having poor structure and things like that, speaking under or over time. There's no hard and fast rules, by the way, about timing. So if someone rebuts for 4 minutes and 5 seconds, I don't take a point off method in my mind or in reality. If someone speaks for 8 minutes and 35 seconds, I don't take a point off necessarily. Method is the whole of their speech, right? If their structure was excellent but their timing was poor, you consider that holistically. If it was all poor, then you can start taking points away. Any questions on method? Yeah, I can't imagine there would be. Okay, scoring. Each speech is out of 100, and that is broken down into 40 points for matter, 40 points for manner, 20 points for method. The average speaker score is 75, therefore the averages of those criteria are 30, 30, and 15, and the average is contextual and not constant. What that means is a 75 at Easters is different to a 75 at Australs, is different to a 75 at Worlds. More importantly, a 78 at Easters is different to a 78 at Australs, and more the further you go. Obviously, Worlds has a much broader scoring range. Margins operate like that. 1 to 3 points is close, 4 to 7 points is clear, 8 points and above is very clear. And usually the limit that we place on decisions is 15 points. But adjudicators sometimes can go beyond that if they feel it was appropriate. In terms of scoring, pardon? Right. The priority, to my mind, the priority in terms of scoring should be get your decision right, get your margin right, and then get your individual scores right. And I think most adjudicators do tend to have this. The way that manifests is, as I'm watching a debate, at the end of each speech, I'll write down like an indicative score. Like, how did that speech feel? And because I've had like 1 billion years of debating, I'm able to maybe have a slightly more accurate indicative score than people who are newer, just because I've seen heaps more speeches. But that's fine. I still would want to review those at the end of the debate. If I add up my indicative scores throughout the debate, and they lead to a different result than the one that I feel has been, than the actual outcome that I think has happened, then I have to review whether my thoughts of the debate are correct. Like, did the negative actually win, even though the AF have high scores? And if I still think the negative has won, then I have to monkey around with some scores. I have to figure out why and reward or punish speakers accordingly. Is the margin correct? Same thing I go through. Was it actually as clear as my scores add up to be? If not, where do I add or detract? And only then do I try and make individual scores match up to what a speaker gave within those two things, correct decision and correct margin. The reason I point this out is because I think this should be your priority stream, but also when people obsess over speaker tabs, this is why it's kind of pointless. Speaker scores don't reflect the speech that you gave. They reflect the score the adjudicator had to give your speech to make the debate work the way that they saw it. So that's not to say that if you gave a good speech and you got a shit score, you shouldn't be annoyed, or vice versa, although no one's ever annoyed by getting a good score of a shit speech. But it's to take it with a big grain of salt, which is that individual speaker scores are always lower in priority than those things to adjudicators, and so don't mean that much. And as you adjudicate more and more, you'll understand that. You'll give 77s to two speeches in different debates that were quite different, and you'll start to realize that speaker scores are not the holy grail of comparison that you once thought. Any questions about scoring while we're here? Perfect. Okay. It's odd that halfway through I now have a slide called How to Adjudicate. This is the actual process. Having gone through the criteria, matter, manner, method, and the scores, let's now talk about how you actually reach your opinion. This is actually not even about how to reach your opinion. I'm not going to talk about that. You listen to the speeches, you decide which team is the more persuasive on those three criteria. It's a holistic judgment, quite impressionistic too. This is about how to deliver the adjudication, and also a little bit about how to think about it. So this is how I do adjudications. That's not to say that this is the right way to do it. There are any number of ways that you could clearly and persuasively convey your view of a debate. But this is just the way that I've chosen, based on things that I found understandable when I've been a debater, and things that I feel fairly reflect the whole of a debate. So that is what I call, the third speech for the whole debate style of adjudication. And that's where it's as if you're a third speaker for the debate. You pick the key issues, the key themes that encapsulate the debate, and you analyze them. And you hope that all the matter of the debate that is important falls into those key themes, just as a third speaker would. And so then you analyze which team won on those issues. And you also analyze the relative importance of those issues. Same as a third speaker ideally would. You balance the contributions of each team across the 6 speakers on each issue, the positive material, the rebuttal, the time spent. You decide which team won which issue and how much that is important to the eventual outcome of the debate. And so sometimes it's a simple matter where one team wins all 3 or 2 or 4 of the main issues. Sometimes it's less clear when there's 2 major issues in the debate and one team wins one and the other team wins another. That's when you have to think about which issue is more important and why, and explain that to the debaters. Or by what margin was each issue won? Did one team totally own the first theme that you were talking about, but the other team, second team, really narrowly won that second theme, and therefore that's why that first team won? Importantly, when critically evaluating the matter, refer to the manner and the method. And this is how you incorporate those things. You say, the affirmative team won the first issue for the following reasons. Because of the content of what they said, because of their ability to respond to what the negative said here, because, maybe, if it's appropriate, right, of the way in which they conveyed that. The passion with which they spoke, the clarity, the sophistication of their language, because the prioritization, and this happens quite a lot actually, if something is given a lot of time by a team, it's easier for them to win it because they've had more words that they can throw at it. And that's not just a matter win, that's a method win as well. If you agree with them that it was, in fact, a high priority issue, and chances are, the more time people spend on the issue, the more you'll agree it's a high priority issue. If you agree with them, then you should consider and you should say that part of the reason they won that issue was the time they spent on it or the priority they gave it within their speeches. So does that as a style of adjudication make sense to everyone? It involves you either... So for me, I will have developed my themes for the debate usually by the third speeches. And it might change if there's a radical change at third speaker, but I will have an idea of what I think are the main points of clash between the two teams, and then I'll try and decide which team won. The benefit of this is it allows you to cover almost every major thing that the team said in the debate. And that's good, because teams deserve to be listened to, and also they complain less if they're listened to. If you're able to point out to a team that you have factored in almost everything they said, they have very little grounds to actually complain about the decision. Like, they still will to like each other and their friends, but they're much less likely to actually complain and give you poor feedback. A less difficult but less ideal option is to just use the criteria as your guide. Who won on matter, who won on manner, who won on method, how much did they win by, therefore who wins the debate. This is appropriate for less experienced debates or debates where there's a vast gap in experience, because that's where you'll have a team like literally just win on matter and on manner and on method. And that's where I will change up my adjudication style, and I probably won't go through those three issues because that doesn't actually necessarily reflect why one team won, because there's much more than that. So I would just point out the bits that made the team win and just spend more time on feedback. Oh yeah. Ravi was potentially going to be here, but he's not. And Meredith, unfortunately, had to go home sick. So neither of them can offer me other methods. So if anyone in the room has any other methods to adjudicate, tell me. Yeah. I just wanted to, as the official Ravi spokesperson. Dong, do you have any? Right, everyone does. I just didn't want to, I don't want to be didactic about it, right? Because that's what makes things the same every year. And we should, if we can think of other cool ways to do it, please. Yeah, good, right. I have my hidden fourth criteria of hotness, but, oh, fuck. That was a joke. Australian Federal Police, that is also a joke. How did you know that? All right. Some notes about note-taking. This is where if I had a whiteboard and the will to use it, I would... but the second part... there is no marker, I don't think. Where? Where? None of these things is a whiteboard marker, you spastics. No, it's not necessary. The point that I was going to make is going to be pretty easy to make. I draw a line on an A4 page very far towards the right. I will leave about 2 inches of space, yeah?
Wait, which way?
Okay, I take it back. About there is where I draw a line. And I used to draw a line there, but now there's no point. Good story, right? So I put the name of the person there. Goes, first affirmative, Amit. And then I put all the stuff Amit says there, and then I put what I think about what Amit says there. And I usually will use a different colored pen for that. I've seen people use multiple colored pens if they want to make a reference to manner in a different color. I usually will just make 1 or 2 points about manner on a page, or not even, because like I just have a feeling about how people speak. I get a vibe, right? But that's how I do it. Other people like to break things down. There's no sheet there. I thought it would still be there. Other people like to break things down more, and they use like a line across the bottom where they specifically talk about method or manner things. Tim Jeffrey, when he adjudicates, likes to have a little like pop-out box like that he draws in the corner where he writes the like 3 or 4 main things, main messages that he wants to give to a speaker after the debate. So it'll be like good manner, good second argument, shit prioritization, shit timing, right? Just so that he doesn't have to look back through his thing. And that's probably a good idea. And I don't do it because there's no room, and so I go through afterwards if I'm adjudicating for feedback purposes particularly, and I will write numbers next to the things that I want to talk about. So there'll be like numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 in circles on my page, and I usually just remember what I want to talk about at that point. So, it says there analysis as you go at the end. Realistically, I don't think there's anyone who can just write down what someone is saying, not think about it, and then at the end be like, okay, now I will think about the debate. I also worry about that because it means you think about it as you wrote, like what you wrote down, not necessarily what they said. So that's why I recommend, you listen, you analyze their argument as it comes out, you write in a red pen or green pen or whatever, why is this true, where is the link to the topic, is this ever true, is there an example of this, whatever. And you do that as you go. The dangers of note-taking is firstly, don't finish arguments for people. And I'm guilty of this because because I'm a billion years old and I've seen a lot of debates, you just hear arguments that are the same in a number of debates, right? And so you just think that if someone is starting to make the same argument, that it's going to be the same argument all the way through. But it might not be. It might have a better bit in the middle or the end, or it might not have the middle or the end that are important. Take down notes about what someone actually says. Do as little paraphrasing as you can. Sometimes you have to make things fit, and you're not writing down verbatim everything everyone is saying. But particularly, what I worry about is don't take notes that improve someone's matter. Because sometimes by shortening stuff, you use better language because that's the language they should have used because it is more precise. Keep an eye on the fact that you're not improving someone's speech or missing out on key parts of it because you have heard a similar argument before. Yep. I would be changing pen, right? And it doesn't bother me. I just put one down and pick one up. If it's you could buy a 4 pen. If it's an issue like that you don't want to deal with, the fact that you have those separate spaces means you technically don't have to change pen. I just like to, so that if I'm looking down my page for feedback or for analysis as opposed to the content of the debate, it stands out to me more. But each their own, right? Some people I know at the end of a speech go through and highlight things that are important. Makes it even easier for you. You can do that as you go as well, but the more bits that you have going at once, the harder it'll be, right? Any other questions about how to adjudicate, like the process of adjudication or note-taking? Very good. Scoring. I've already sort of covered this, which is I usually will write down an impressionistic score as I go about what I think a speech was worth. Be willing to reevaluate that at the end, or you end up often punishing first affirmatives, at least until you get as old as I do, and then you tend to overrate a good first half because you're just like, oh yeah, you made the debate happen, thank you. So yeah, be willing to change and reevaluate your preliminary scores based on what happens in the debate. If you thought the first speaker's speech was a 76 and then everyone after them was much better, but you still thought that first speaker's speech was really good, maybe push it up and push everyone up. Doesn't cost anything to give out high scores. It's free. But likewise, you don't always have to keep going up, right? It is not true that in every debate, every other speaker will be better than the first half. It is not true. Yep?
When you actually do write down like your adjudication stuff in the notes, do you think it's a good idea to sort of write down like their point and then all the logic that goes with that, or sort of would you prefer to do it like with memory?
Good question.
It's a balance between how much you write down and how much you actually memorize from the speech.
Yeah, right. It's a good question and a fair one. It depends on who you are and how you operate. So Tim Jeffrey, when he adjudicates, will fill every bit of his page with words because he'll write down as much of what the speaker is saying as possible. And I'm just too lazy to do that. And I also trust I've got a good memory of things I hear, luckily, which is why I should go to more lectures, by the way. That's just for me. Like, it's dumb. So, yeah, right. So I will write down headings, key bits of analysis, things that are particularly good or bad, and I'll trust that I'll remember roughly what happened. Tim wrote down much more because he was able to do that and have his pen going the whole time. Up to you. Again, you develop an idea of what is important and what is not to keep in a speech, but try not to do that by assuming what the argument is or completing it for the speaker. Yeah, that is definitely true. Your instincts. Do find ways to justify the outcome of a debate beyond your instincts about the decision. Find things in matter, manner, or method. In the issues of a debate, I'm not going to be able to focus if you do that. Yeah, good work.
What's the point in doing that unless you're going to use it?
Good advice. Your instincts can and should guide the debate, though, because they're usually right. If you have a gut feeling about which team won, then you're going to find it hard to give it the other way, and then you'll start finding kind of fake, implausible, shitty reasons. You've got no choice. It sucks, but you've got no choice but to more or less go with your instincts. But give yourself the chance for your instincts to refresh themselves. Read through the material. Try not to take a position too early in the debate about which team is winning. Keep an open mind about things. Review your thinking about stuff and actually compare and contrast the teams. But at the end of the day, if your instincts tell you one team won, that's what you've got to go with. You can't pretend to have someone else's brain. You can't say, what do I think the chair of the panel is going to do? Because that will end up in a weird fake decision that you will struggle to properly justify. So, even though your instincts will, at your core, your gut will be your guide, you cannot ever rely on that in an adjudication because it's not good enough. There have to be reasons that you can point to in the debate that justify the outcome for it, other than I just really, really bought what you said. Yeah, it was just, yeah. So don't doubt your instincts. Give your instincts an opportunity to refresh themselves, but find ways to justify your decisions, not based on, I just thought this team won. What's going on? How to give an oral decision. In our opinion, and I'm not sure who the "our" refers to in that, by the way, but let's pretend like I consulted with people. I don't want to be didactic, and I don't want to tell people that this is how it is and there's no way around it. You can always do your adjudications however you want. You are the boss. But in my opinion, your oral decision should proceed like so. 1, tell people who won right away. I hate waiting for decisions. I've done a lot of debates, and I hate waiting for decisions, and I welcome, no matter whether I won or lost, people just telling me up front. If you are worried that people are not going to listen to your reasoning, then become a better adjudicator, have better reasons, convey them more clearly, or just realize that it doesn't matter if people don't listen to your reasons. You don't have to educate people who don't want to be educated. Give them the decision up front, because it's cruel otherwise. 2nd, give the reasons for the decisions as clearly presented as possible. 3rd, your feedback to the teams. Now, there is a secret 1.5, which is that sometimes there will be some issues of feedback that cut across the whole debate that you can make mention of in a general way before you give your reasons for the decision. So you can say, thanks for that debate. I've awarded the debate to the affirmative by a close but clear margin. generally speaking, I thought this was a debate that used examples poorly, that didn't identify correct examples, that didn't analyze other teams' examples, but this was a debate where use of examples was necessary for the following reasons. As such, I think everyone in this debate would benefit from picking examples more selectively, explaining them more fully, and engaging with the other team's examples. Now, I thought there were 3 issues overall that decided the debate, right? Then you move on. So if there's anything that cuts across, like structure, manner, or if there's any particular like tactical engagement issues that cut across most of the debate, that's when you mention them. Then you give the reasons for your decision, and then you give sort of your feedback to the teams if you want. Most of my feedback tends to occur in my reasons for the decision, right? So as I'm analysing each issue, I'll talk about the strengths or deficiencies of each team in engaging with that issue. It does probably make it a little bit hard for speakers who want to take notes, because sometimes they might be like, well, this is just the adjudication, I won't take notes. And then at the end, I'll be like, that's all I got. But tough titties. I don't give generally individual feedback in my main oral decision of a debate, except where that debate is expressly for the purpose of feedback and improvement, like, you know, like a pre-Australs, like training debate, that kind of thing. In an actual tournament debating context, I will just give what you see in front of you and invite people to approach me for individual feedback, which I'll happily give. Also because it's easy to be honestly critical of someone one-on-one than in front of other people. That can be a bit embarrassing or rude. And it's also a waste of time for some people. If they just don't want to come to you for feedback, that's totally fine. Like, people do not have to get feedback from everyone. At a tournament, if you're debating, I would encourage you to always get feedback from adjudicators, because it looks nice, you might learn something good, and they might adjudicate you again. So there's a really good benefit to learning what they like. But if you're an adjudicator, people don't have to approach you. People don't have to get your wisdom. It's totally up to them. Oh yeah, that too. Yeah, I sure can't. It's why no one approaches me for individual feedback, by the way. Feedback. Let's talk about feedback. Constructive feedback is different to just critical feedback. Yeah. Give people things they can work on, right? Don't just say, this was done poorly. Try and follow it up with, so for next time, maybe use of examples is something you can focus on. For example, when you said this country, maybe what you could have talked about was why that was analogous. Maybe you could have talked about why the other team's analogies were not as good, whatever. Give people a little bit more concrete stuff to work with rather than just needs more analysis. Just needed more analysis, sorry. Because that's not a thing. Like, that doesn't mean anything to anyone. I got years and years of needs more analysis, and I didn't understand what that meant. Younger debaters, use the compliment sandwich. Say something nice, say something they can work on for next time, say something nice. When you're a younger debater and you're learning how it works, you're going to make many, many more mistakes than you will necessarily have successes. But it doesn't feel good to have someone list the 15 things that you did wrong in that speech. And it's also, I don't think that helpful either, because people don't remember all that much. People can't work on everything for their next debate, right? Like, you just can't be like, cool, yep, now I flicked the switch and now I'm Victor, well done. Thanks for all those 15 pointers. Pick the things that will, you think, most benefit that speaker, the big things that they can change to move them up a point, to move them up a bracket, whatever. And also, acknowledge their strengths so they want to come back. People who get told their shit don't want to come back to debating, but debating is richer if we have more people doing it. Also because it's like more friends for all of us. And that last point is just because sometimes people feel like if they acknowledge the strengths of a speaker, it makes them look weak as an adjudicator. Like, to be a good adjudicator, you have to just find heaps of faults. But that's just not true. Good adjudicators are good at figuring out what a speaker did well, as well as what a speaker did badly. And so I really would encourage you to find the things that speakers did well and badly. So that, as well, so they know what to do next time, not just what not to do. So, I would encourage you to give examples from the debate, because that makes things stick in people's mind, and it makes general advice like more analysis understandable. So you'd say you need more analysis. For example, you needed to explain the following links in your argument which you didn't make. But that said, try not to make your feedback too specific to that topic, because otherwise it's only useful when you do that topic again. So, one sec. So Tim Sonreich is an excellent debater and an excellent adjudicator, but sometimes the problems that I've had with his adjudications is what he teaches me is how to win that debate again. And he'll definitely teach you how to win any debate again, but that debate might not come up again for a long, long time. So I would encourage you to try and find the general feedback point within a specific example from the debate that you just saw. And if you do want to give debaters some matter hints, that's totally fine, but don't spend all of your feedback doing that. Because like, as often as North Korea comes up, not North Korea comes up much more often. That's a fact you can take home. Is there any questions? Pardon?
Where is Austral's next day?
Yeah, right. South Korea will be fine. Everyone should go. Any? We've already won the bid, thank you very much. Any questions about feedback? Yep. Oh, sorry, I forgot you. What do you mean? Oh yeah, 10 to 15, I think. More and people don't pay attention, they get bored, their pizza gets cold, whatever. Less and you're not doing justice to what happened in the debate, probably. Or if you are, then there's probably a lot of critical feedback that you can give, right? If you can summarize the debate in like 5 minutes.
What about if you like say, like you summarize all that, you sort of do it in 5, 6 minutes, and then like face a lot of the feedback, like you give your feedback.
Yeah, like it's obviously a guide, right? If the explanation of the decision happens fairly quickly, then you can spend more time doing general team feedback, case feedback, whole debate feedback. Or you can just finish it in 10 minutes and say, cool, approach me for individual feedback. You don't have to stretch it out. Like, I'm just trying to give general indicators. Obviously, each debate will be different. Some debates are super complex, super tight. You have to go through everything, and it'll take closer to 20 minutes. It shouldn't really take, I don't think, longer than that. No worries. Any other questions on that?
For a panel adjudication, or even individual feedback, would you say it's better to divide and conquer, or for a whole panel to give one person feedback at once?
Yeah, it's up to the debaters. If they're keen as mustard, they will go up to the chair and the panelists and try and get feedback from all of them. If they're fussy or they have a particular opinion or they just only want so much feedback, they'll approach one adjudicator generally. Yeah?
It's also reliant on going to what someone's saying. If you do have a chair, sort of chair, and like one guy says, no, I didn't go with it, but the other guy says, yes, I like the decision. When you give your feedback, right, do you take into account how do you take the person who didn't go with the decision into account?
Yeah. You see this done sometimes, and I think it definitely should be done because you should acknowledge that there's like a plurality of opinions in debating, and that basically you should acknowledge that if there had been a different adjudicator sitting there, the decision may well have been different. That's only if if the debate was reasonably close and you can respect, if not agree with, the other adjudicator's decision. And that's where you say, whilst a majority of the panel was convinced by this analysis, a minority of the panel thought that it was unproven to the degree that was necessary to win the debate or whatever. So you can definitely acknowledge that without pointing to which person, even though I did just then, even though there's no one there. So yeah, I think, and you definitely should do that because it points to the fact that it wasn't a unanimous decision, that it could have gone the other way, and that there's still potentially deficiencies in the winning team, which is probably true of every team, right? But yeah, it's only when you think a decision was very clear and when someone can't articulate the reasons they gave it the other way that you shouldn't feel inclined to incorporate their decision into your oral adjudication. But good question. Anything else on the oral bit? Okay, potential issues. And I'll go through these fairly quickly because I actually think there's a few left and I apologize. Definitions. A definition is only invalid if it's undebatable. Now that we're at uni debating, if a definition is unreasonable, that doesn't mean it's invalid, but you should keep it in mind. So if a definition is far from the actual wording of the topic or the spirit of the motion, keep it in mind and reward a negative team that is able to negate that definition, but only when a definition is functionally invalid. That is, if it's tautological, like self-proving, or if it's unfairly time or place set, or it has no logical link to the words of the topic. Only in those situations do you consider a definition invalid and thus allow a definitional challenge from the negative team. Yep. Yep, but again, you're more charitable to the negative team for not challenging because they're trying their best to make a debate happen. And if an AF squirrels, intentionally or unintentionally, it's great for the neg. This is the thing. Negs complain, and so do I when I'm in that situation. I'm like, oh, I've got to tear up my notes, but that's it. Find 2 reasons that the AF is wrong, and you will have won the debate. Because, like, adjudicators hate it when you squirrel. They will punish an affirmative team, and they will reward a negative team that can make something out of that. Yep. All right, sorry, any questions about definitions before I move on? I'm sorry I wasted too much time earlier with the basics stuff. Third speakers are not allowed to bring new matter. Third affirmatives technically are, but I would punish them for it. Third negatives are not allowed to bring new matter, but invariably they will. So what do? You remember the rules and you follow them because they're there for fairness sake, but you be reasonable. That is, you can't pretend like a speaker didn't say something. And it's very rare that, unless it's like a brand new piece of something in the third negative speaker's speech, if it's a brand new argument or a brand new piece of analysis that was not there at all, only then can you feel comfortable ignoring it. The rest of the time, if it's a really good explanation or if it's a really good example, you deprioritize it, you penalize them, but you don't totally ignore it. Because you can't. Because it's already in your head and it's already in your thinking about the debate. This is slightly more controversial maybe than the other stuff that I've said. And maybe some other adjudicators will totally just ignore what a third negative said if they think it's new. I think you can't. I think it was said. It was said in the 8 minutes. It's in your brain and you can't unthink about it. So you should just actively penalize it as an argument. Acknowledge that it came out late. Point to maybe if it came out earlier that it would be enough to win, but maybe suggest that it's not. Or if it is enough to win, say it's because everything else was so close and it was still something contributed by the team. Yep. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can just tell if something is new rebuttal, but is actually a positive point for the negative team that should have come out earlier. You can tell. New matter doesn't have to be intentional for it to be new matter, right? Like you don't have to be a cheater. You can just be like, oh, I just didn't think of this till now. It doesn't change the fact that the AF can't respond to it, but likewise, you can't unhear it. Cannot be unheard. That's the deal with third speakers and new matter. Any questions on them? Come on. Burdens. Now, teams can put any burden they want on another team or on themselves. But you, the adjudicator, are the person that decides what burden a team has to fulfill to win the debate. The neg can say, the AF must show that there is all of these things won't happen to show that the model should exist. And only if you agree is that the actual burden of the AF. And likewise, teams can't say, for us to win the debate, we must prove A, B, and C. That's not for them to decide. That's for you to decide. Only you can decide what the burden is on a team. Don't accept what a team says as the legitimate definition of whether they win or lose the debate. You can consider it, and if they, if in discussing the type of problem that their model is trying to solve, if they inevitably take on a bigger burden than they actually can solve, consider that. Definitely consider that in your decision. But what they say is their burden or another team's burden is not for them to decide. Yeah, this is a personal thing as well. Do not enter the debate and presume one side is harder to win than the other, even if that's true. Because if you do that, too dangerous. Because adjudicators will then just take their personal opinion of a topic, assume that one side is right, and then make it maybe easier for the other side to win because they had a harder time because they're arguing something that is wrong. You've got to assume that the topics that the ADJ calls of tournaments are setting are balanced, even if they're not 100%. You've just got to judge the debate that you see in front of you, regardless of whether one side, in fact, was easier or harder. Yep?
Did you ever acknowledge if you do believe that the topic's weighted?
No. I don't think you should. Well, it's not your job. Yeah, I always hate it when I see adjudicators do it, even if they say it to my benefit. It's not the adjudicator's job to decide whether a topic is balanced or not. Afterwards, you can go up to the adj core, and I would encourage you and say, I'm not sure that the neg is particularly strong to that. My app just creamed it really easily, or whatever. But I wouldn't say that in your oral decision if you don't have to. Yep.
So last Easter, there was one topic on that which was legalized incense. And I think for me on some first years that I talked to, that was really hard to actually get stuff in your head around it. Because it's sort of like a experience.
Funny because in the dining room, that's actually bad to have a lot of
Well, I think that's a good example of why you shouldn't prejudge whether one side is weighted or another. Because possibly, as you go through debating, you might change your mind, and people do, right? And that's indicative of the fact that it isn't necessarily one way or another. And a good example was from Monash Mini recently, when luckily I didn't see this topic. Pardon? No. The topic that I'm talking about was that that fines should be proportional to wealth. Yeah, and I had a negative team come up and ask me. I didn't actually judge that topic, but a negative team came up and asked me what they should have run to win, and I couldn't help them. And I've been in this game for a while, and I was just like, if I can't help you, that's too weighted, and that's when I would go and say that to someone. And it's tough as an adjudicator, but you don't punish an affirmative team for getting the luck of the draw that gave them that. They shouldn't have to do a better job than they would otherwise to win that. If they make arguments that are more persuasive, at the end of the day, they win the debate, even if it was easier. Otherwise, you are just entering the debate and choosing which side you think is easier, and choosing to what degree that was easier or harder, and that is too unpredictable. Make sense?
If a specific topic doesn't sound biased, but the particular model run by the app did kind of make it biased, but was still reasonable.
Oh yeah, choices that teams make, you absolutely can and should penalise or reward. So if their model is, I don't know, abort gravity. Let's go with my earlier example. You can and should say, you made it impossible for yourself to win. Source science. But, choices that teams make, definitely, but things that are out of their control, you do not reward or punish them for.
But if the app runs a case which complies with the motion, but they've eliminated the one very prominent point, the negative has to rebut them on.
Well, then, firstly, it was a poorly defined, poorly made motion, and just the same as anything else that I said before, you don't punish the app for it. You don't punish the app for being smart enough to think of it, right? You complain to the Edge core about it.
What if the model they proposed is almost sort of assuming what's improved? So their model is that the superpowers would give up all their CO2 emissions and everybody will be happy.
Yeah, okay. That happens quite a lot in debates. And I would suggest that where there's procedural issues like will this happen in the real world, teams should have to try and demonstrate that something will happen, but you should also assess all of the other points about whether it should happen. That's where the debate occurs, in the normative realm, right? Not in the practical will it happen realm. It's policy. So they should be able to offer some reason why China is not going to veto stuff, but they shouldn't have to prove that beyond any kind of burden. Yeah.
Debates like that, when you argue about effectivity, there's obviously a reason in the real world that these countries aren't doing it anyway, which is what we actually have to argue whether or not they will actually do it.
That's right. And most of the time, if something like this happens in debates, teams will go, it might not happen, but we think it should, and we think if the country's listening to me, then they'll change their mind. Thankfully they don't, right? Otherwise everyone would be invading everybody. Yeah. Negative cases, can't run a pure negation. That's just to note that negs have to have their own constructive case, and you should watch out for that. But almost all the time, they are actually defending the status quo. Negs just forget to say it because they're shit, right? They just forget that they are running a model which is status quo. So tell them to make that explicit, but don't pretend like they were running a pure negation just because they said the AF model has more harm than good. More harm than good means they prefer the status quo. Pure negations are remarkably rare. It's really hard to see it. Yep. Right? Like, this is why I'm saying it, because at every briefing, everyone's like, you can't run a pure negation, and it's true. You have to have something that you stand for. I think a pure negation would just be if the affirmative team responded to what the neg said by saying, well, yeah, but this is better than the status quo, and the neg said, well, we don't support that either, but your model just has the following flaws. It's like, well, what do you support then, guys?
That happened to me once, I think, last year in East working at the tech. Basically, we were fine with all the arguments, except they weren't making anything. And we were like, okay, well, they're defending the status quo. And then they had, like, the second speaker was just against the status quo.
Yeah, right, that's dumb. Well, that's shit adjudication, and I can't fix that. I mean, yes, I can.
Like, I think the difference comes, like, the neg should just make sure, like, usually status quo adjudication is that the neg should at some point just, like, say, like, the status quo is better even though it's shit.
That's right. The better negs will run a comparison, will pretend like the status quo is a model that they have to defend and explain why it's better than affirmative team's models. But that's like the better negs, not like all negs are automatically invalid if they don't do that, right? Most of the time, they will be defending the status quo. Keep an eye out for that. False facts. Remember, don't enter the debate. Yep, very good. All of that speaks for itself. Running out of time. Running out of time. Yeah! Wasn't sure when the slideshow was going to end. You got to remember, I wrote this slideshow about 12 months ago. So, anyone have any questions about adjudication? No. All right, go out and hopefully the